Yeah, alongside on the other side of
Hear me now? Yes. Good evening. My name is Amy Henderson Riley. I'm a commissioner here in Collingswood, and I want to thank you for coming out tonight. Whether you're joining here in person, if you're online, or if you're watching the recording, we really appreciate you being at this event. So tonight we're going to have multiple parts of this presentation. Let me just lay out what this will look like. First, you're going to hear from our Chief of Police, Kevin Curie, outlining bias-based policing here in Collingswood. Next, you'll hear remarks from Dr. Fred McDowell, the superintendent of schools, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A. So we would like you to feel free to ask any questions related to the topics at hand tonight. Lindsay Ferguson, our wonderful Director of Community Engagement, located back here, has pens and paper. Anytime you have a question, if you'd like to write that down, you can hand it back to her and we'll have a Q&A session. In addition, I'd like to acknowledge Lindsay Zogan, who's here from Inner Purpose, a mental health professional. So if there are any mental health needs or things that may come up, you can either write them or speak to her in the back. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge and welcome our new mayor, Daniela Solano Ward. She is also here in attendance tonight, and should there be any questions in Spanish, she's happy to help translate. So without further ado, Chief Curie.
Everyone care if I don't use the mic? Can you still hear me online if I don't use the mic? Good. Sorry, I don't. I can project well enough that I hopefully don't have to. Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Mayor, for hosting this. It's a very important thing, I think, for our community to come together and go over the policies the Collingswood Police Department has in regards to bias-based policing. Part of that bias-based policing is a bias based on your immigration status as well. So we'll get into that a little further on in the slides. But just wanted to let everyone know that this is really just going over the policies that we have in place here in Collingswood. Some of them mandated by the Attorney General in New Jersey, and we've had them in place now for about 4 years, officially updated with this policy to be in line with all the Attorney General updates and the laws that govern us here in New Jersey. So the purpose of our bias-based policing policy, and I won't go over it word for word, pretty much is to prevent us from having any bias impact the way that we police. And what I mean by that is we're not going to harass and discriminate against anyone based off of their actual or perceived gender identity, their gender expression, their sexual orientation, race, color, gender, creed, national origin, ethnicity, ancestry, religion, age, marital status, LGBTQ+ status, disability status, or veteran status. Part of that is immigration status also. The reason it's not listed here is because we now have a policy specifically for immigration. So this is just what bias-based policing is, and I'll bore you, I'll read it. Sorry for this, but bias-based policing refers to the practice of using a person's race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or other personal characteristics as the sole primary reason for police action, such as stopping, questioning, searching, or arresting someone, rather than the behavior or evidence of a crime. So what that's saying is that based on those characteristics that are listed there, that would be the sole purpose we would be able to take law enforcement action against someone. That would be biased policing. Our policy says that we're not permitted to do that. And if we're going to engage with anyone or talk to anyone, it's got to be on that second part, which is going to be, we can go and engage someone based on their behavior or evidence of a crime. So it's just making a differentiation between the two, that we can't go to you solely because you fall into one of those protected categories, or for any reason other than we suspect that your behavior or there's evidence of a crime. So our policy clearly it prohibits bias-based policing. The other part that's unique about that is, and this is kind of a way to check ourselves, is that we have mandatory trainings regarding this, and we also have documentation of all of our stops and our searches. So that is a way for the officers on the street to be doing their job, and then someone in the administration or their sergeant will be checking on their stops and their searches to make sure that it's in alignment with our policy. And the reason that happens, and that happens regularly without checking, we do regular checks of that and other policies as well. That is just to ensure that no one is approaching that line of breaking the policy or crossing that line of breaking the policy and treating someone unfairly. What that does, it ensures equal treatment for everyone, and it really protects those trades that cannot be alone used to justify stopping someone. So in Collingswood, and this policy helps to reinforce this, is we really stress and emphasize fair and impartial policing. We want to police in a way that regardless of who you are, what you look like, how you feel, how you think, that will not affect how we're going to treat you, how we're going to police you. The only thing we're looking at would be your behavior or you conducting some type of criminal activity or motor vehicle violations. But again, there is mandatory reporting in addition to what we do internally. There is mandatory reporting to the state as well, to the prosecutor's office and the state. So at the end of the year, we have to produce a report to them showing the stops that we have and to make sure that we are in our policy, we're following our policy for bias-based policing. If that's not the case, we have to show that we have some type of internal affair investigation, which would mean we found there's an issue with our policy, we've identified it, we've corrected it, and we then see that it's not going to continue. Whether that's with one officer or if that's going to require the policy to go out to the entire department again as a refresher, whatever the case may be, will dictate our actions there. But that is what the mandatory reporting is there for in the internal affairs process. It also covers transgender interactions. So this policy ensures that we're respecting chosen names and pronouns. It specifically spells out in our policy that we are to ask what name and what pronoun the individual that we're dealing with prefers. We are not to make assumptions. If they correct us, we are to address them as the name or the pronoun that they choose to be addressed by. So there is something for the rest cards that would have to be a legal name or their given name at birth. However, when we're addressing and interacting with them, we will use the name that they prefer and we will use the pronoun that they prefer. Equal medical attention is somewhat of a, if you are a transgender female and you would have some type of medical issue that would not typically be dealt with, we are not looking at what your born gender is, we are looking at your gender identity, and we will treat you medically based on that. Searches, this also goes to the transgender population. So an officer, when we are conducting a search, if you are under arrest and we're going to search you for any reason, the person that we're going to search will have the option of having a male or female officer to search them. It is what their preference is. If you are transgendered, it would be whatever sex you would want to search you is what we would make available to you. Whatever makes you the most comfortable. We're not going to automatically assume that because you were born a male, that we're going to automatically have a male search you. If you identify as female, we will offer you a female to come search you, or a male, whatever you're more comfortable with. Also, with the way we separate you, so in New Jersey, if you have a male and a female detainee, they have to be separated at all times by sight and sound. So that also translates into the transgender community as well. So we will put you with that gender that, again, you are more comfortable or that you associate with. Supervisors, this just kind of goes over the internal affairs process I was talking about. So supervisors are constantly monitoring the officers and what they're doing. Whether it be a review of their body-worn camera footage, whether it be reviewing the reports, or whether it be going to a call and watching how they interact with individuals. So they are constantly ensuring that we are following compliance with our policy. And then if there is an instance where that officer is going off track, there are several different ways that we can go about the internal affairs process and the outcome of that. And that could be counseling, like I was saying, it could be talking to someone, maybe they have an implicit bias, they're not even understanding or realizing that the action they're taking is the bias coming out. It could be training, as in that officer needs more training, or it could be department-wide training that we need, or it could be punitive discipline. And our internal affairs process isn't really meant to be punitive as much as corrective. So it says punitive, only because there's a punitive nature to what that is. It could be days off, be monetarily punitive, but really it is to correct the action of the officer and get them back on track where they should be. Yeah. So that goes over bias-based policing. It's a very brief overview of what our policy is, but again, it really just says that we're not permitted in the College Police Department. We don't accept policing using a bias in anything. So that is more or less what that policy is. The training that we do, I mentioned implicit bias too. So it not only recognizes known biases, but it also goes over implicit bias too, and raises awareness for officers that may not know or understand that their bias is coming out and interacting with people. It may not be something that violates the policy. However, it could be something that offends the individual that we're dealing with. So we do have a block on that every year as well. Next topic is the immigrant population policy. So I won't go through all of these words here, but feel free to read them if you will. The New Jersey has an attorney general who is the chief law enforcement officer in the state. He is the one who dictates policy that departments must follow. Most departments have a bias-based policing policy. Most did not have an immigration population. Obviously, back in 2018, I think when the directive came out, there was a much needed reason for that policy or the directive to come out of the Attorney General's office. And what New Jersey developed was the Immigrant Trust Directive. And what that policy and that directive does is it sets boundaries in where local law enforcement can and cannot cooperate with federal authorities. So it really takes the bias-based policing model and carves out a special place for the immigrant population. Yeah. So, as I said, in 2018, the Attorney General issued a directive known as the Immigrant Trust Directive. It applies to all state and local police in New Jersey. And the reason behind it was really to protect the immigration population and communities. It was also to show that immigrant population and community that law enforcement is there to help and hopefully instill some type of trust and confidence that they can come to us if they're a victim of a crime or they need something still without fear or retribution of us going to a federal authority and speaking on their immigration status. So our policy strictly prohibits a lot of things. I won't go through line by line, but in a nutshell, what it does is this Immigrant Trust Directive and our policy restricts us from assisting ICE in their investigations. So we're not permitted to help them with serve warrants that aren't a criminal warrant. We're not able to let them know when we have a detainee in custody that might have citizenship. So we can't ask, according to this policy, we can't ask what their immigration status is. And you can't go and release any public information, any otherwise publicly releasable information on the immigrant population. So what we can do, according to our policy though, is we can still enforce the criminal laws in New Jersey. So your immigration status does not give you the carte blanche to commit crime in New Jersey. So you can still be held liable for that, and we can still prosecute you under New Jersey state law. So you are not a sovereign citizen where you sometimes have a different view on New Jersey. Complying with valid judicial warrants is different than an administrative warrant. The next slide will get into that, but we can help ICE enforce a judicial warrant. And what that is a criminal warrant. So that is no different than you having 10 parking tickets that you didn't pay, you didn't go to court, and the judge issues a warrant for your arrest. The same can be said for an ICE judicial warrant. That is a criminal warrant, which is different than something based on your immigration status. So they are administrative warrants, and they're more like detainers. So we can't force detainers. We don't even get involved with detainers, but again, it's important to spell out that we can help with valid judicial warrants. We can request proof of identity. We can ask the individual information necessary to fill out the fields in our arrested. So if you are arrested, we are permitted to ask you if you were born in the United States or if you're born somewhere else, and we are permitted to ask your immigration status at that point. What we cannot do is use that immigration status and tell a federal authority that you may not have citizenship here. So the only time we can let an authority know that we have you in custody and you're not a U.S. citizen if there is some type of exigent circumstance, and that is going to more than likely be that judicial warrant or an arrest warrant saying that you are a threat to society, and therefore we have to notify federal partners that you are in custody. That wouldn't be any different than if you were someone on the FBI's top 10 list and we happen to not have you in custody, we would be notified. Yeah, okay. So no different, and it's not something based on your immigration status. You can go. So the difference between a judicial warrant and an immigration detainer or an administrative warrant. So the judicial warrant is issued by a federal judge. They are who we have to listen to. They have the authority to issue warrants. An immigration detainer is issued by an ICE agent as part of their immigration investigation. So it is not a judicial warrant. That is not in my chain of command. I don't need to, and I can't actually enforce anything issued by an ICE agent. It would just be a judicial warrant issued by. So legal power, it's legally enforceable for us to do judicial warrants. Immigration detainers, they can request us to help with an immigration detainer. And I'll give an example of this. Say you are arrested for shoplifting. In New Jersey, if you're arrested for shoplifting, it's an automatic that we have to fingerprint it. Those fingerprint results go to the federal government. The federal government might see that and send us over an immigration detainer. We will not cooperate with them to let them know that you are in custody or not in custody. We will not enforce that detainer at all. And we would just not be non-responsive to it at all, because it does not fall into the authority of what the New Jersey law enforcement do. So again, the judicial warrant is a probable cause of crime determined, and the immigration detainer is a civil immigration. So it is civil in nature, and that's why an agent is the one issuing that. So it would be the same as a foreclosure and you're in your house, that is a civil action. It would be child custody issues, civil action. We enforce criminal law, not civil. So that is the big distinction. Visas, just very quickly, if you've ever heard of a T visa and a U visa, so the T visas are temporary visas given to victims of trafficking, human trafficking. U visas are given to victims of witness of serious crime. So in order to get this type of visa, you need to submit an application that goes to the local police department. Once we receive that application, we give the information to the Camden County Prosecutor's Office, who will then help us, not even help us, they'll make the determination, their attorneys make the determination whether or not the visa is going to be issued. So we are just the nexus on where you apply for a T visa or a U visa, but just so we are aware. I don't know if anyone's heard the terms at all or had questions about the terms, but that's what they're. So what this means for immigrants in the immigrant population town. Having this policy in place and having this directive provides the immigrant population with a safe place to report crime in New Jersey. And that, again, that's any state or local law enforcement agency in New Jersey. It is designed to give you that population the confidence to come to law enforcement in the event they are making. It's designed to show that we'll protect everyone regardless of their immigration status. And we have this problem, policy to promote trust and not fear among the immigrant population. So I think what happens a lot is law enforcement is not seen as a New Jersey law enforcement officer. The immigrant population in that community they'll just see a law officer and not know the difference between getting deported potentially and just being found guilty of a crime here locally. So this immigrant trust directive and our policy is meant to give the confidence to them that they can have trust in local law enforcement. They don't need to fear us when we show up. Good. So I will say that I'm going to a brief little know your rights slide. There are only a few things that I'm going to go over, but I'm not an attorney. I don't claim to be an attorney, and this is not legal advice. This is just me going over what some legal rights are in their possibility. And this really applies to any citizen. So I would suggest that you consult with a lawyer if you have any specific legal questions. And again, I am not. Okay. So it is recommended to carry a valid immigration document. The reason for this is if you are detained and you can show that you have valid citizenship, it will make that interaction a lot better. Now, it's not to say that you need to carry it. It is just a recommendation that you do. Again, do what you'd like. It could just help with the interaction be a little more smooth and more quick if you do have that documentation rather than having to be detained and then prove at a later time that you have that documentation. If you are stopped by ICE or any federal agent or any officer in New Jersey, you have the right to remain silent. That is right here in New Jersey. That is right here in the United States. So you do have the right to remain silent. You are not mandated to answer questions. You do not need to do that. And if you have your rights card, I don't know if the borough has it, but I know there's a lot of different organizations out there that will have rights cards. It would be recommended that you get one of those rights cards, so you have a little pocket-sized card of what your rights are, and a quick reference to what you can do if you're interacting, if you're in that position, you know, with ICE agent or any other federal law enforcement or local. Recommended to stay calm, don't run away. You are permitted to record what is happening. So that goes for any interaction with any type of law officer, whether it be local, state, county, or federal law enforcement. You have the right to record what is going on. We record here in New Jersey because we have body worn cameras. I can't speak to the federal government, but you have the right to record. You can ask them what agency they're from while they're reporting you, and they're required answering you. And you can also say, am I free to leave during your question? So if it is nothing more than, and I guess we've seen some raids, if you will, of ICE agents going to places of work and asking questions, you can ask those officers if you are free to leave. They'll either say at that point that you are or you're not. If you are not, then it's going to prompt more questions, but you are able to ask them, am I free to leave? You are not going to get any more trouble because you're asking if you're free to leave, and that goes for anything and anything, even if it's local law. If ICE knocks at your door, so you're home, knock at your door, you do not need to let them in your house. They'll have to show you the judicial warrant that they have. And that is the only authority they would have to enter your home if that warrant says that they're committed. So you can ask for that warrant, and again, you do not need to answer the door, and you do not need to let anyone into your home if they do not present the legal authority to enter your home. So that would be that judicial warrant, granting them the ability to. You also have the right to remain silent. That remains with any. You can ask them to show their badge and ID. The other thing I will say is, right now, the federal government has taken a stance on immigration. So they do have, say, a DEA agent or an FBI agent. They're all federal law enforcement officers. So ICE is pulling some resources from other departments as well. So just because it's going to be a DEA agent knocking on your door doesn't necessarily mean that they're not operating underneath the scope of ICE. So it's important to see that judicial warrant and see why they're there and make sure that they have the legal authority to enter your home and question you. And again, you can still remain silent, but just because it's not an ICE agent doesn't mean that they're not going to be operating under the scope of that umbrella, of that federal agency. Lastly, before we get into the questions, Dr. McDowell is going to speak. I will say that within the immigrant community, there is a lot of youth that could be potentially affected. With that, we have seen in media that there have been federal agents that have shown up in schools. Dr. McDowell and I have been in conversation well before any of that happened, seeing that this might be a possibility. And him and I have an understanding of what the school policy is going to be and what our policy is. So we have spoken about this at length, and not too far at length, because it's pretty cut and dry. Like, we are not going to cooperate, and more or less the school's not going to let them in. But we have discussed this at length, I would say, just because it is not only is it a vulnerable population to begin with, but when you talk about children, it's an extremely vulnerable that we're seriously concerned about. And often they become the senseless victims, if you will, in all of this. So I will turn it over to Dr. McDowell, unless the Deputy Mayor would like to say anything, but Dr. McDowell.
I'm going to use the microphone. I don't have the same presence as Chief here. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. To get us started, thank you to the borough and the borough leadership for even hosting this type of conversation. It's so critically important. And so the number one priority of educators in our community is the protection of our children. And so we don't take that lightly. And so from a federal perspective, since 1974, family privacy and protections have been federal law. And since 1982, immigration status has also been a non-issue as it relates with access to a free and appropriate public education. And so we hold those two core laws as law. And we don't waver, no matter who is knocking at the door, or no matter who tweets or posts. And so I'm also joined this evening by two of our board members that are also in the audience based on the importance of this. And so I believe it's important to know where we stand as a school district by sharing what our core values are. And so when we started looking at what was needed in order to not only communicate to students, staff, and families in which we serve, but it was also important for our Board of Education to also make a very public stance and proclamation to reinforce, to make sure that the governing structure as well as the administrative structure of our schools were on the same page. And so I'm just going to read it really quickly. And so the Collegeville Board of Education, we believe that the continued education of students, staff, and community to support inclusive excellence and social justice is an essential investment. Equity and inclusion are fundamental elements of all decision-making and curricular development. Learning opportunities should incorporate and mirror the diversity of the 21st century so that our students are prepared to participate in the global economy. The Collegeville Board of Education is dedicated to supporting practices that promote dignity and respect for all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, differing ability, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, family configuration, socioeconomic status, or immigration status. End stop. And so there are also corresponding laws that are both at the state level that also support this. And so some of the things when this came under the radar of school leaders across the country, we all started talking. And so before proclamation, before partnerships, individually as school systems, we began reaching out with our local law enforcement partners. And I will say wholeheartedly that the Collegeville Public Schools and the Collegeville Police Department have been partners. We've been partners in the work, not just on this issue, but on every issue, and we'll continue to do so. And so we started having conversations at the national level in terms of district leaders that then came down to the state level, and then it got even more granular at the county level, where we all calibrated, retooled, and then began communicating at the local school level to building leaders, district leaders, and school personnel about what our public stance was, what our policy is, and what to do in the event of a situation that takes place in our schools. And so, and we continually revisit that on a quarterly basis with our school and district leaders to make sure that they are crystal clear. Our attorneys, and so in our school district, we have a whole army of attorneys. We have also calibrated and sought their legal counsel in order to make sure that we had systems in place and that we had them at the ready in the event that some of those challenges knock on our door. And so we are fully prepared to defend the rights and privileges of every child and every staff member within our community. And we stand at the ready in order to do it. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. At this time, we'd like to open this up to a Q&A. And again, the way that we'll do this tonight is we'll have Lindsay Ferguson passing out some paper and pen, so that way questions can be anonymous, and then we can read the question. Everyone can hear the question. We'll also share any that are online. So everyone can hear a question, you can ask it anonymously, and then whoever in the room is the correct professional. I also neglected to introduce Chief Joyce in the back. So there be any questions about fire and emergency response here in the room. And again, if there are questions in Spanish, we also welcome those. You can take them or read them.
So while everyone's preparing questions as well, I just want to note, so Dr. McDowell hit on the core values of the schools. What I think is very important is the core values of the Collingswood Police Department are service, integrity, respect, and compassion. They drive everything that we do. So immigration is a very concerning topic right now. But with the core values of service, integrity, respect, and compassion, we are prepared and insulated to handle whatever issue may arise. If we stay true to those core values, you can apply that to any issue that might come up. And again, as long as we hold true to that, then our mission will be accomplished. And our mission is to protect the residents, business owners, and visitors of the borough. So in a way that is fair and important. So again, right now, immigration is a very concerning topic, but we are insulated and prepared to apply that same easy, basic concept and principle to any issue.
Some community volunteers who are here, if you could help gather the questions and then you can bring them up. So the first one is, do we have officers in the Collingswood Police Department who are fluent in Spanish?
So we have one officer who speaks Spanish. There are two officers actually who speak Spanish. The issue with that is, and I won't even say it's an issue, but we have a rotating shift. So that officer is not available 24/7. Those two officers are not available 24/7. Through our partnership and our mutual aid with other communities sort of surrounding us, we can easily ask for a translator. And if someone is not available in a neighboring town, we also have a phone service that can help with that translation. So there are things in place that would help us with that. Yes.
Next question is for the superintendent. How are we this summer making sure not to lose students over the summer? How do we make sure that they're coming back? Are we checking on with students? What does that look like?
Great question, but a very complicated answer. And so what I would share is that normal ongoing communication, which generally happens during the school year, happens weekly. But our schools, they try to keep families informed and try to keep them connected. And so when new things are happening within the localized school community, we're communicating that. There are going to be families, unfortunately, that leave. But what is most helpful is when communities make very public statements, very public actions that they are not going to be anti-immigrant. And so I think that as a family member, I have new to the country family members that are affected by discussion as it relates with immigration, as it relates with what's happening within our world. And so the number one thing is making sure that the local community is welcoming, is accepting, And so from a school perspective, we're continually putting out positive information. But as a general rule, we don't ask about immigration status, and therefore we don't differentiate how we communicate to all of our students. And so it's not in our records to even be looked up or to be shared. And so we give general information about other things that are happening within our school district. As a district, we have communicated through multiple channels on our public stance. And so, but unfortunately, there are going to be families that are going to insulate themselves, and they're going to go to places where they feel safe. And as long as we continue to have dialogue like this, that actually helps families understand.
So there is a partnership between schools and law enforcement as well, called Handle with Care. So anytime we deal with a school-age child that might impact that child's school life when they go to school, we have the directive that we have to notify the school of that occurrence. So that doesn't stop even though school's not in session. So for those families that the school is not able to reach, if we do have any interaction with them, we do a Handle with Care form and give it to the administrator of the school.
Is it legal for ICE to pick up people on the street without a judicial warrant?
It is not legal for New Jersey law enforcement to assist ICE with detaining someone without a judicial warrant. So we don't cooperate with them, and I don't answer to their line of authority for the administrative warrants or the detainer warrant or the detainers. So that's where I would say seek the advice of the attorney.
Let me keep some questions going for you, as Chief, since you're sitting here. How could someone confirm if an officer at the door is legitimately a Collinswood police officer and not someone else?
So there are a couple different ways. Collinswood police officers all wear typically the same uniform, is number one. Number two, if someone is at your door and representing themselves as a Collinswood police officer, you can call our non-emergency phone number, which is 856-854-1900. That will bring you to our central dispatch. You can ask them, say, hey, I live at 123 Any Street, and I have an officer Terry at the door, identifying himself as working for Collinswood. Can you confirm that that is who is at my door? And they can either tell you yes or no.
If ICE approaches someone and either that person or a witness sees it fit to call the police, what are the responding officers allowed or not allowed to do?
So we would be limited in what we could do. You could call the police. What we would probably do is just try to confirm that that agent is an actual ICE agent. We wouldn't really ask them what they're doing because, again, we are prohibited from interacting and assisting them with their investigation. So not really a very clear answer, as much as we're not really allowed to assist them whatsoever. Like I said, if it were something where they came out to the school will be instructed to call us, and we would just make sure that they are actually some type of federal law enforcement officer and ask why they're there.
I'm a volunteer who leads programming in neighborhoods with large immigrant populations. If ICE shows up at our program, what information or cooperation am I required to provide? In what ways can I protect the youth and families that we serve?
I consult with an attorney.
We do have a list.
Yes, we do have a list of just local attorneys we pulled off of the internet. So if anyone would like that resource, there are 16 or so local attorneys that specialize in immigration.
Okay, I have a couple now for Dr. Michelle. Are school staff trained for what to do if ICE erupts?
So school staff have been, their training is very simple, call supervision. And so what we've tried to do is we've tried to, because this is a time of great anxiety, we've tried to eliminate people trying to do what Chief Terry does, which is interpret the law. And so if ICE enters their school, they are to do absolutely nothing. They do not allow, the only person that is authorized, that can authorize an individual to enter into the school is the superintendent. And so that has been the training. Call the district office, And then my next call is to our army of attorneys. And so I think that, we continually put that in front of our school leaders, who then share that with their local staff in order to lessen the degree of anxiety and confusion among staff. And so what I will say is that our staff are, pretty adamant that their number one responsibility is to protect the children in this community. And so, we don't envision that being a core, challenge here in Thomaston.
Quick follow-up to that. If ICE does show up, will the staff deny that entry?
Yes, all of our schools, are, access only, and so you can't just walk into our schools. And so all of our, administrative assistants who actually monitor our security doors, they have a very simple directive. The first individual that they contact is their principal or whoever the building leader in charge is. And then that building leader, they call my office and then wait for further directions. And the general direction is they do not enter our office.
Immigrant families may hesitate to fill out school forms like to be eligible for free lunch benefits because of fear that the information will be shared with the federal government. How is family and student information protected at the schools?
So at the beginning of this discussion, family privacy, has been the law since 1974. And the Plyer versus Doe, case in 1982 has been the law of the land as it relates to immigration status. And so as a district, none of our documentation, none of our paperwork asks for status. We do not ask for social security numbers. And so we ask for other forms, of identification so that we know who are in our schools and, verification of local residents in, Collinswood property. And so from a family perspective, this is not exclusive to the immigrant population. Sometimes families are, mistrusting of institutions. And so we have counselors at the ready to talk to families about the importance of filling out those lunch forms in order to do one thing, and that's to make sure that every single child has access to a healthy nutritional breakfast and lunch at school. And so we don't use that to track students. We don't use it in order to share information. And so generally, when you have a one-on-one conversation with the family about the importance of the forms, most families move forward with the documents so that we can get them that support.
Next question. There are two sets of standards, federal and state. How can we as leaders manage the confusion between the two?
That's a pretty broad question. It's hard to know what specific standards.
I don't want to, I'm not gonna out the
Yeah,
person
yeah,
here because I don't know
okay.
who it is.
I'm the one that asked this question.
Would you like to share an answer?
Well, certainly, we seem to have a hard time talking, so, not in the past, but today. I have a hard time speaking for a long period. There's so much confusion that goes on. When you hear, but the federal government's doing one thing, the state takes the position on the other. You guys are our leaders. What recommendations do you put into saying more or less instead of covering the butt or covering the follow the letter of the law? What input do you offer or have you observed to say, we gotta somehow or another make this marriage get back to being healed? We gotta make people feel comfortable to emphasize what the superintendent said, to make people feel safe, to emphasize what the chief says, to make them feel safe. And give people a little comfort to know that, say, hey, look, this button in their heads doesn't seem to help anybody. These people are getting worse as ever. Look at the attendance tonight. It's not well publicized. There was something that wasn't well publicized. Look at the attendance tonight. And some people might feel great to be here, and other people just weren't knowledgeable enough. It's a bad week. It's a 4th of July week, but at the same time, leadership has to start from somewhere. Whether it's the president, the governor, or local officials, we need to have better dialogue. We're saying, this is the problem that we're facing. And you're covering your butt, and our new administration's going to be saying, hey, we're here to protect things.
So I think there's an ideological difference in how the local government and state government feels versus what the federal government feels. So the easiest way to say that we don't agree with your stance on something is to say we're prohibited from helping in any way with your agenda, right? It is not the best of circumstances, and as I said, we've always had a bias-based policing. It wasn't until 2018 that we had the immigrant trust fund, right? And that was because there was a shift in national politics that wasn't in line with many states, not just New Jersey. New Jersey's leadership, being the Attorney General for law enforcement, he is the chief law enforcement officer in New Jersey, took the stance that we don't agree and we're not going to help enforce what you're doing. We do not agree with your agenda, and therefore he's saying, I'm not going to permit the law enforcement officers in my state to carry out your agenda. Now, when does the headbutting stop? That's a far larger question than we're going to be able to answer this evening. But as it stands now, in order to try to give people comfort, I think what it has really been is just, here is our clear stance. And our clear stance is against their clear stance. It's not perfect by any means. However, it's better than just sitting back and not doing it.
If you talk, you right, when you make part of your presentation, and you say, well, we have to question where the person that might have made an alleged offender, we're gonna make them feel comfortable in their position. So you're covering the point that you're trying to be protected, as well as keeping the potential person that may get locked up comfortable too. You know, and
So that's where the line is, like, committing a crime is committing a crime,
right,
right? An immigration violation, not necessarily committing a crime according to New Jersey law,
I'm
right?
not talking about immigration as much as what I am, like, let's just say transgender part.
Mhm.
Some of the today's society says, it makes your position a lot more difficult, where, you know,
I don't think it makes it more difficult. It really just makes us more well-rounded and respectful to the people that we're going to be dealing with, right? So it's not that it's unclear as much as sometimes you just need to answer the question. It really comes down to being respectful,
yeah.
right?
So in response, and so I'm gonna use my teacher voice also, in response to your statement on schools, unfortunately, across this particular country, schools have been brought in to the political polarization. And so if we recall, during the pandemic, you were either for or against remote instruction. You were either for or against masks. You were for or against this, for or against that. But there's only one set of expectations when it comes to children. Since 1974, the privacy of families has been the law. And schools have adhered to that law, regardless of who was in the White House, who was in the governor's office, who was in Borough Hall. Since 1982, the law has been that schools have followed. Immigration status is not a reason to deny any young person between the ages of 4 and 18 a free and appropriate public education with all the rights, privileges, and protections, regardless of status. And so our public position has always been and will continue to be, we're going to protect the rights and privacy and privileges of the students and their families. And the public proclamation, in order to revisit in these polarized times to our community, immigrant, non-immigrant, LGBTQ, non-LGBTQ, transgender, cisgender, doesn't matter, is that the dignity and respect of all the members of our communities will be adhered to, and that is part of our DNA and our core value.
You're following the law, and is it up to you to go back and communicate with the people that make the law and say, yes, what you're doing is right? Or is it up to you to wind up saying, we're just following what you're telling me?
And so we all have, as government officials, as public servants, we all have a legal right or a legal obligation to follow federal and state law.
Understood.
And so from a perspective of a district leader, a father, a resident, a taxpayer, we voice our opinions through our actions. Most of that is through our vote. And so what I would share is that we as a school district are advocating at the county and at the state level in order to push state and federal leaders to advocate on our behalf. And so we are in communication with our House of Representatives, our state assembly persons, individuals that work in Trenton. And so all of those individuals, we are in continual communication, both as individual school districts, also school district organizations. And so there are multiple organizations that represent schools that also lobby at the state, pushing for change and pushing for what's right. And so all of that is filtering up. The largest bully pulpit in New Jersey is the governor's office. And our efforts today are aligned with the state of New Jersey. And so we have to continue to all be one voice, pushing for change, which ultimately is going back to dignity and respect for all.
Appreciate your answer. And one other thing I put on my note, I do not see one American flag except that little flag behind the bar. See that little tiny flag behind the bar? I don't see any American flag in the president's. And I just want to point it out that it matters. Got a lot of chairs. We have no flag.
So I will say too, as far as engaging with legislators, so there are professional associations. So I am on the New Jersey State Chiefs Association of Police Executive, right? So I am representing Collingswood, but I'm really representing the chiefs in our state. So as an example, tomorrow I am meeting with Jack Chitterell as part of that executive board, right? And in 3 weeks, I'm meeting with Mikey Sherrill. And the purpose behind that is to make sure we're going over what is working in New Jersey from a law enforcement perspective and what's not working.
That's my point. That's my point. That's exactly what we are, as people in the state are anxious to hear, that from the local level, it gets to the point that people will make try in what the superintendent says, the people who will have the power of one of the two people will wind up being unknown.
Sure, and listen, before it gets there, it's got to get to the House and Senate, right? So we are meeting with legislators as well to bring up concerns that we have. So there is professional associations that do that work on behalf of law enforcement in New Jersey. I am part of that association
It should
and
be
am out doing it.
enforced, and to interrupt, it should be enforced that what your efforts are should be enforced to everybody in this town, in this county, and in our district. I appreciate your effort. Thank you.
Before we conclude, are there any questions online?
Yeah, one from someone online. The question was, the context was that they know that we've had situations locally in Haddon Township and in Collingswood a few years back. And wondering if either Fred or Kevin could speak to any personal experiences you might have had in the community with this situation that would inform how you would handle it now with the intensity of the current moment. Just a light one. And
So with that township, really the only action that law enforcement could take would be to go to the mayor, deputy mayor, the commissioner, to go to county commissioners, to make calls to the governor's office, to find out what's happening on the federal level, right? Because we're not permitted to engage with them at all and cooperate with them at all. Really, it is a legislative change that needs to happen or be more clear and stringent in New Jersey and communicated, right? So our role in any of that would be not sure what's going on. We can't work with them. They're not going to call us and let us know. So we go to the elected officials, find out what we can do to make that situation better, more clear, preventable if in any way, but really that's the route.
So my response, so whoever you are online, thank you for the question. My response would be is continued partnership between the school district, local law enforcement, align with those two sets of core values. So the core values of the school district is regardless of who you are, who you love, or where you come from, doesn't matter. With the local, police department, it's compassion, care, respect. Those tenets don't change, even when we're dealing with, situations like we're dealing with right now. And so continued partnership, continued communication between the school district, local law enforcement, the borough, we're one community. And the goal of our community is for everybody to grow and thrive and to feel safe and to belong. And we'll continue to do that, no matter what the situation, that comes.
The last question that I have here is, where is this presentation available for those who are not here this evening? So to your point, sir, tonight's presentation was streamed live and the recording will be available on our Borough YouTube channel. In addition, we'll have the slides available after the fact. Yes.
Yeah, so we'll have the slides available after the fact. The five-page policing policy is currently up on the website. We can push that forward to make it a little bit easier, and we can put our immigration population policy up as well and make it a little bit easier to access, so that people can read through and dive a little deeper than just which slide.
And as mentioned at the beginning of this evening, we also have Lindsay Zoga here from Interpurpose. Lindsay, can you just raise your hand so everyone knows who you are? Sorry to put you on the spot, but if you do have any questions that tonight's topic may have raised for you, she also has a list of resources tangential to the topics that were raised tonight, which we're also happy to share. If no further questions, we can conclude. I want to thank you for coming on behalf of the borough and the partnership and all of those in the room. Thank you to the school board members who are here and to all of the community members who are able to take time on your Tuesday night. Thank you so much. Please join us for the July 4th activities. We'll have lots of American flags there and celebrating with our fireworks presentation. See you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.